Welcome to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Our goal is to equip listeners to become better readers of Scripture and more skillful leaders in their local churches and ministries. If you would like to learn more about Pillar Seminary and sign up to receive exclusive content from Pillar's faculty, please visit pillarseminary.org.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Pillar Podcast. We appreciate your time. We're so delighted that you're here with us. We have got another fun guest in store for you. This is part of our series that we've been working our way through on defining Christian nationalism in various ways, and then providing you, our listeners, with some resources to think constructively about it and how we might positively affect change as we come into this tumultuous election season. We've recorded a few interviews already. We have also recorded a kind of a general introduction. And this is another one of these interviews. I'm really excited to have here with us Caleb Campbell. Thanks for being here, buddy. Good to see you. We'll go through your bio in a minute, but first, hello.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for having me.
And we have as well Donnell Moore with us, and then Daniel Cabral. Guys, thank you as well for being here. Good to see you again.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so the thing that gave rise to all of this, which we may have covered in the introductory podcast, was a conference that I attended in Phoenix in January. Caleb was one of the folks who helped host and organize this conference and bring everybody in. That's how we met. I was introduced to him by a mutual friend who lives and works in Phoenix, Dave Beldman, also a former guest on our podcast. He had a Judges series that people still are talking about. So shout out to Beldman and his work that he's doing with Surge Network and Missional Training Center, which is another really fun, different kind of seminary approach. So Dave introduced us, and Caleb was kind enough to let me tag along with all the insiders and get to know them and eat and drink and enjoy some time with them outside of the conference, which is how we got all these guests and all these really wonderful connections. So it was a real treat. Caleb, I should tell you before we move on, the basic preparation I've given these guys to try to help get ready for you is that you're certifiably insane. In the best kind of way. Would you care to comment before we proceed?
I've been hearing that for much of my life, so I think much of humanity seems to agree with what you just said.
Hit the nail on the head.
Yeah,
I don't know if we'll have time, but I just remember, especially at the breakfast when I was sitting across from you the last day, just hearing stories that you would tell, and then the ways you would react to the situations in such a more curious, intellectually curious way and gentle way than I'd been flipping over tables and getting arrested for some of the things that you've gone through. And it just struck me, man, you are cut out for this in a really wonderful way. And so we're delighted to introduce you to everybody and then to share what you're doing as one of just some really good resources for this. So the reason we say that you're insane is because you describe yourself to me as a missionary to Christian nationalist, which is a whole different mindset from just about anybody else that I've ever come across.
That's right.
So we're going to unpack that and then maybe recommend some counseling. We have some good connections we can give.
That's great.
So Caleb, you're the lead pastor of Desert Springs Bible Church in Phoenix, Arizona.
So far.
You have an MDiv from Phoenix Seminary. You're working on a Doctor of Ministry from Fuller, studying leadership in multi-ethnic and multi-generational churches. Is that water? Should we know? Or are you?
You'll never know.
Sipping on a little bit of Grandpa's cough medicine there?
You'll never know.
We'll find out as it goes.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. You're the regional director for the Surge Network. You have founded the ministry and work with Disarming Leviathan. You got a book coming out in July with the same title, Disarming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor.
That's
what
right.
have I missed? What else before we unpack some of that?
I love the Dallas Cowboys.
Are you being serious? Are you just saying that?
I am. No, I love the Cowboys. So Phoenix, when I was growing up, we didn't really have a team. The Cardinals didn't get here until the late 80s. And so the Cowboys were one of the few that would be broadcast on, Sundays. And then I lived in Dallas for 6 years when I was a kid. So I got to see Aikman play and Michael Irving and Emmett. So I was hooked then and remain an avid fan.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's. I didn't know if Donnell told you to say that because Donnell's also a Cowboy fan. So.
No. I sensed that our spirits were communing when we first met, and I just knew it.
That's hilarious.
Yes,
so
sir.
3 long-suffering people here is what you're.
That's right.
Telling me. Oh man,
that's right.
That's great. Okay, so tell us about Desert Springs. Tell us about how you came into that role first before we get going with Surge Network and Disarming Leviathan.
Sure. Yeah, I met the Lord at Desert Springs in 2000, 2001. Came on staff in 2006 as a part-time staff member helping do young adult group and communications, and eventually became an associate pastor, went to Phoenix Seminary, stepped into the lead pastor role in 2015. My predecessor, Rick, had been there for 30 years, and
he left in 2015.
He did, just in time. I think he intuited it. I knew. He doesn't admit it, but I think he knew it was coming. So he had done 30 years at Desert Springs, and great pastor. He's still my pastor. I see him every other week for breakfast, and
awesome.
It was a awesome transition, super smooth. Took us about 3 years, and I loved it. And I thought I knew what I was getting into. And then when we did the transition, it would have been primary season. And so there was kind of all this rumbling. So within my first year, I remember staying up, watching the election results in 2016, and then going to work the next day. And 2 of my team members are in the parking lot crying, very upset at the election results. And then 2 of my team members when I went into the office were celebrating. And I remember thinking like, oh man, this is going to be harder than I thought. And for the first few months, couple years, I thought, all right, 80%, I mean, we are a predominantly white, suburban, we're 47-year-old now, non-denominational Bible church in North Phoenix. So Arizona generally is conservative. Phoenix, the area that we're in, is generally conservative. There's a statue of Barry Goldwater 10 miles from where I'm currently sitting. John McCain represented me in the federal government for almost my entire adult life. I thought I kind of knew where people were at. The majority were conservative, but they were kind of like Barry Goldwater, John McCain style conservatives. But really, politics had not been super spicy. On occasion, there'd be something about abortion or immigration, but our congregation had been active in caring for immigrants. There's a lot of refugee resettlement in Phoenix. We had been actively involved in that. We had been very careful as a congregation with how we nuanced conversations around abortion. And I don't remember there being any sort of big blow-ups or anything like that. We're theologically evangelical, so theologically what you could call conservative, but still socially active, just like the textbook definition of evangelical is, that we have a high Christology, a high view of Scripture, the Great Commission, calling people to repent and believe in the gospel, and then active engagement in living out the kingdom in our civic life. And conversations in 2013, 2014 around immigration were generally met with compassion and concern and thoughtfulness. So you'd say to somebody, I'm going down to such and such facility to help care for refugees. And you would be met with like, oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. 2016, 2017, 2018, it started being like, caring for refugees. Right? How do you know they're not going to bomb us? How do you know they're not going to kill you? And are they, it's all a scam, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
We do the same thing we had been doing, but I was getting resistance. And I remember thinking like, where is this coming from? Because I was under the assumption that the majority of people saw what was going on with the whole MAGA world thing and like plugged their nose and pulled the lever for the red team, which the majority of them been doing much of their life. And what I came to discover was that there was a multitude of people who not only voted for the red team, they gave full-throated endorsement to the means and methods of the MAGA movement, which was dehumanizing, fear-mongering, anxiety-inducing, othering, the characteristics of the spirit of the age, if you want to think about how the scripture talks about it, or the kingdoms of this world. And I was struck. And so from 2016, I would have people coming up. I would say something like, immigrants are humans. And I would be met with like, don't you get political? It's like, dude, that's Genesis 1, bruh. Like, what do you mean don't get political? Like, what are you talking about? We should care for poor people and think about how to create systems to care for the poor and the widow and the orphan. Oh, no, that's liberal. Okay. So I'm shocked by this. Again, I'm kind of new to the whole lead pastor hustle. And by the time we get to 2020, 80%, by the end of 2020, 80% of the people that were in our congregation in 2016 were gone. And the majority of them, some of them left the faith altogether, watching the evangelical movement basically betray its principles. Some were just done with the combativeness, like their community group or their Bible study was blowing up and they're just done. They're just going to go home. Yeah. The majority, however, made the choice to attend other congregations in which were taking more combative or vibrant stands that were more in alignment with their political commitments and postures. So some of the churches, for instance, like they would do sermon series like why social justice is not biblical justice. And that was ringing for people. And so I was like, man, what is going on, and that kind of set me down the path that caused me to start this ministry and begin this project.
Man, yeah, that cuts deep. It hits home. I do recall, I think our audience needs to hear more details about this, a story around immigrant care with a bill where you chained yourself to a door.
I threatened to. Yeah. So
Go on now. Give us this story.
Yeah. So I think it was 17 or 18. I don't quite recall. There was a talk track going on at the federal level about picking up and deporting anyone who was undocumented, including DACA recipients. So this was a bunch of rhetoric that was happening by our federal leaders. And I get a phone call from our youth leader who said, hey, man, like all the youth group is crying. And I was like, what's going on? They're like, and he told me, he's like, did you see what, the federal leadership is saying about deportation? And so at the time, a good portion of our student ministry were DACA kids. So they had deferred action for childhood arrival, or their aunt, uncle, cousin, mom, dad, brother, sister, would have been under imminent threat if that rhetoric would have become active. So whether it was a lack of documentation, overstaying a visa, whatever it was. And so I was like, all right, like we're going to figure this out. And one of the things that we basically came down to was if they need safe haven, we'll put them in the student room and I'll chain myself to the door and we'll just do that. Right. Like I'm basically just looking at the civil rights era playbook and I'm like, I can do that. I don't know what else to do, but they're going to have to move me. And that was one of the first times I think that some of our leadership of the church were like, oh, this is getting serious. It's not just political talk track. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just saber rattling. Like this has actual impact in our community, not just in our community, in our church. One of the things that I kept having to help people understand is like, this isn't like some ambiguous mob of people. It's our kids. This is our kids. And that I think was so disorienting for people because when you're faced with someone when you look someone in the eye, when you share communion with someone, you do have to reckon with your politics and your political commitments and your posture and your rhetoric. And it's easy to be dehumanizing to people on a screen who scare you.
Yeah.
It's a different story when you're sharing communion.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that. I think it helps to hear some of your DNA, your ministerial DNA, in the best way. I mean it so reverentially that you're nuts. You're really in the best way insane, and it takes that sort of courage, I think. And so that story was pretty impactful to me to hear, and it really, you're right. And when this is not a theory or a straw man or a boogeyman, and these are real people, whole different set of things to deal with. Want to let you know that if you are interested in studying with us at Pillar for the fall 2024 semester, we're still accepting applications all the way up to July 29th of 2024. So you can find out more information about the application process and see the application itself at pillarseminary.org/apply. If you have any questions, email us at admissions@pillarseminary.org, and we'll get all your questions answered and help you fill out that application and get it submitted.
So you talked about 80% of your congregation left. In line with George Barna, with 30% of professing Christians have, only 30% of professing Christians actually admit going to an institutional church. And the other have just not given up on Jesus, but has given up on the institutional church. And so I'm just thinking, how have you repopulated the congregation?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
So we now have an awful lot of spiritual refugees who are coming from a myriad religious traditions. So like Pentecostal, Lutheran, non-denom, Presbyterian, and the binding factor is not historic theology. It's our posture towards, quote unquote, the culture war. And we've taken a non-combative posture. We don't think we should fight a culture war. We think we should serve the community and live a cruciform life. And just that is like, people are like, that we're just here to play that game. Like, we don't want to try to dominate over other people. We want to serve.
Actually, the way of Jesus? Are you kidding me?
As I understand it, yeah. And I think that it's actually by communities of Jesus living cruciform lives that will actually transform society, not trying to dominate over and force. We just have 2,000 years of that, 1,700 years of that being tried, and it just doesn't work. So we got a lot of folks who are, they're asking questions like, hey, how do you help us deal with church hurt? There's a guy in my congregation, sweet man in his 70s, salt of the earth, grew up small town Arizona, and he got kicked out of his church because he, at the men's Bible study, asked, wait, how are you guys voting for this guy who's talking this way about women? And I thought we were to be men of integrity. And his pastor had to sit down with him and said, you're stirring up, you're being too political. You're stirring up dissent. You need to leave. Well, he got the impression that it was because he wasn't in alignment with where everyone else was at, including his pastor, on who to vote for. And that became a point of division. So he was asked to leave. So we've got tons of people like that in the congregation. And we didn't really do anything different. We just stayed the course through 2020. So how we responded to the 3 Fs of 2020, to Fauci, so COVID, all the stuff around COVID.
There, buddy.
Don't worry, we'll keep it PG. So Fauci, Floyd, so May of 2020, how he responded to George Floyd's murder. Even just calling it murder was like, he took a side. Okay. And then the federal election. And we didn't tell people how to vote. We called people to biblical principles. We led from our convictions. Our board and our leadership team was in lockstep. And so that was a bit, that was empowering. And through that season, we had a ton of pushback, a ton of resistance. I mean, every day, just about every day during 2020, I was getting emails, phone calls. People were printing off packets and dropping it off on my doorstep, calling, saying it was Marxism, CRT, which I didn't know what that was at the time, communism. I got called a communist, a fascist, and a leader with a Luciferian spirit of fear in the same week. And these are and the other thing too, man, like these are people who I've shared communion with for 20 years.
Yep. Yeah.
And that was the most disheartening. But our board and our leadership team was in lockstep, and we basically felt the Spirit say, turn the volume up. We're not changing our course. We're not changing our direction. And we basically said, if every donor leaves and the staff has to become bivocational and we have to move our property, so be it. But we're going to lead from conviction. And we did feel a distinct conviction, like for such a time as this, like if we're not going to stand for our evangelical principles now, when are we? And so there's a lot of folks who are theologically evangelical who are looking for that. And so they're kind of coming out of places. I mean, we've got churches within a few miles of our property that are hosting Christian nationalist rallies every month and firing staff if they don't like it. And so we're kind of, again, like I said, we're kind of in a spiritual refugee territory and ministering in that way, as well as, man, anyone who's curious about Jesus who leans left assumes they have to start leaning right in order to pursue Jesus, at least where we're at. I mean, I get that question all the time. People kind of hushed will be like, hey, listen, I'm a Democrat. Can I come to your church? And the fact that we've received that question multiple times tell you how sick the American evangelical church is. That the people that we are called to witness to assume that we have Jesus plus political conviction as a gospel.
Yeah. Well, and man, we used Gorski and is it Perry, the flag and the cross, as our definition. They talk about it being a deep story. And man, it's deep. It really is. It is deep and pervasive. Okay, so I had some other things that I thought would be fun to chat about, but I let's just roll with this if we can. And tell us about Disarming Leviathan, the ministry. So all of this was born out of this soil and out of this context. Give us what that is before we get to the book.
Sure. So the number one question I got in 2021 from folks in the congregation was, Pastor Caleb, what do I do with my Aunt Betty? How do I talk to my cousin Steve? What do I do with my niece, my son, my mom, my dad? Because they are yelling about stuff at the 12-year-old's birthday party. So Aunt Betty, sweet, grew up going to church. She's got like an American flag quilt cover on her Bible. She's got faith, family, friends on her wall next to a little plate of, George Washington crossing the Potomac or whatever. And sweet lady, loves her country, loves her Jesus, but she is using dehumanizing and xenophobic and rage-fueled language at our family gatherings. What do I do? And so that set me out on trying to discern, like, is all this what I thought was disparate resistance? Was it all coming from one source? And so the Disarming Leviathan ministry came out of kind of this season of discovery where I, at least in my mind, started putting together how all of these disparate pieces and issues that people were expressing rage and anxiety about, they were actually coming from a larger movement that was making money and garnering political power and support by stirring up anxiety and rage and then demanding allegiance. And so started the ministry to just develop resources to help answer the question, what do I do with Aunt Betty? How do I talk to her? What is going on? What do I do with my son? He's buying body armor for my grandbaby for the upcoming war. I didn't even know they had body armor for 1-year-olds.
Good grief.
It seems like the whole world is turning upside down. So what is happening to my loved ones? How do I reach them? And so Disarming Leviathan was an attempt to curate and create some resources to help equip people in my congregation to answer that question. So we've got podcasts, we've got online articles, curate resources, and then the book came out of the project as well.
Okay. So before we get to the book, how's it going? The ministry.
Yeah. I did not set out to start something like this. I was desperately looking for something as a local pastor, and it was out of a vacuum. There was a lot of good resources scholastically, I will say, who looked at American Christian nationalism from a scholastic lens, a historic lens, a political lens, a sociological lens. Whitehead and Gorski, Perry, they've done excellent work. Yeah. There was some work done by non-evangelical Christians, which was great, and I really have appreciated the work that some of those organizations have done. But for me and my evangelical pastor homies, we were looking for something that was making an argument and providing resources from a theologically evangelical perspective so that we could deploy it in our evangelical churches. Yeah. And we just couldn't find any. So started the ministry. And I mean, one of the most frequent questions I get now is, can you come and train our group of pastors on how to do this stuff? Because I think there's a hunger for it. Yeah. And so it's going well. I don't really know how to gauge it. I mean, I am on the Distinguished Pillar Seminary podcast. I feel like I've peaked.
Hooray!
You understand? Like,
yeah. It's downhill from here, buddy. Yeah.
I don't know. I just should I'm just going to hang it up after this particular
done.
interview. Yeah.
It is finished. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess do you get the impression that the resources are meeting needs in a way that people are responding to? It sounds like that is the
core thesis is we should engage American Christian nationalists as a mission field. And just that thesis, I have watched myself and many of folks that I've shared that with. It's like the light switch gets flicked. It's like, oh, right. Yep. That's how we should be behaving, because I came into this basically approaching American Christian nationalism as a heresy to defeat, and the people who imbibed it as heretics to destroy, with all my Bible knowledge. And when the switch was flipped for me to say, oh no, this is a mission field. It just unlocked a ton of resources that the evangelical church already has. Yeah. And it's just refocusing those resources on a specific people group, a mission field that we didn't see before. Yeah. And so in that sense, that's been very successful. And I'm just honored that the Lord would have me play some small part in that.
You may or may not know that we exist entirely from two different revenue streams. One is tuition revenue, and the other is from donations from supporters, generous supporters like many of you. We could not do what we do, including this podcast, which is a ministry of Pillar Seminary, without your generous support. We would ask you to prayerfully consider, if you haven't already, joining us, partnering with us, and supporting the work and the ministry that we do here in all of its forms at Pillar Seminary. You can find out more, and you can go online to give at pillarseminary.org/give.
Thanks for listening to the Pillar Podcast, a ministry of Pillar Seminary for contextual leadership. Please visit us on the web at pillarseminary.org to find out more about our academic degree programs and non-credit learning opportunities. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and podcasting platforms. Thanks again for listening.